Hello and welcome to another Magic the Gathering video. So what I'm going to be doing here, this is a wrap-up video following on from the pack a day series of videos I did for December. So as you know, if you watch the 31 repacks series, I started off on the first of the month and just opened a repack a day, finally finishing on the 31st with an actual Ixalan pack. And it was just a fun little video. Didn't cost a lot material wise to put together. The packs were collected over probably 2017 2018, and I was just buying them occasionally from Dollarama when I had a bit of a spare cash here and there, and I thought it'd make a fun video to just open them at some point, and December seemed like a good time to do it, and a number of packs we had sort of fitted in with that once I added an Ixalan. So I always wanted, as I was going through it, it became apparent that it would be good to do a video at the very end in January where I just sort of go through and attempt to build a deck. Now I could have taken the easy option and built a 40 card seal. You know, it's a sealed pool. Okay, it's quite a large sealed pool. Just build a 40 card deck. That would be fairly easy to do. I mean, I'm not saying the decks would be brilliant, but you could try lots of different things in lots of different colours, and there was certainly enough, you know, playables in there, I suppose, to basically do that across lots of different colours. But I wanted to set myself a bit of a harder challenge, and as I started to open legendaries, it became apparent that, yeah, let's try and do an EDH build using just that card pool. So let's just start from that position first of all. So our first criteria is that we use the card pool and only that card pool to build the deck. Of course, the exception being basic lands. That would be the only thing we'd have to add in. Now, what we could have done, if we'd been so minded, is had a twist on that. So let me just explain. So there's 4 approaches that I possibly could have taken with this particular build, and they roughly fall into 2 categories. So there's those approaches which use just the pool for the actual cards, excluding the, like I said, the basic lands. And then there's those approaches which introduce extra cards. So I'll just go quickly through the 4 approaches that we can do. And the 2, I'm going to talk about 2 of those in this video. So the first 2 are, we happen to find, say we happen to find a commander in our deck, in our pool of cards, which some way or another, by the miracle of randomness, actually had some sort of synergy going on, or its ability was particularly wide that it was fairly easy to synergize with cards. It wasn't like a deep synergy. So maybe it involves something like card draw or sacrificing creatures, that sort of thing. The other thing is, it might turn out that maybe the commander in question really only fitted in terms of the colour identity. It had a much deeper synergy, or maybe a tribal synergy to it, which meant that really there wasn't enough cards to support that synergy. But from a pure colour identity standpoint, yes, we could play that commander, and that would really just become a totem commander for our deck in terms of its colour identity, and there wasn't a lot beyond that. Maybe we could buff it up and turn it into a Voltron style commander, but basically we're only really playing it for its colours, and maybe it won't even get played at all. It's just there purely so we can play in those colours. So in both cases we're using the actual card pool that we did through opening the 30 repacks. Then the other 2 are basically approaches which don't purely use the card pool. One is to, in the process of evaluating the cards and going through them, maybe you notice that there's a particular build around that you want to do. Maybe you have a card in there that is very strong in commander. You just want to build around it, but there's the colours that you end up using in combination with the other cards just don't leads to a commander that you pulled in the pool. Now in that case what you could do is just use, so 99 of the cards come from the repack pool, and the one commander you actually purchase separately once you've worked out what commander works best with those cards. So that's a bottom-up approach, using the cards in the pool, but the topping it off with the commander is where you purchase the commander. And then the final approach, where you're introducing extra cards, is along the lines of an EDH video I did probably about 6 months ago now, it seems like that, where I took one of those, what I call EDH starter kits, which is basically an idea from Benny Smith, in an article online that I read several years ago, where he had these starter kits for all the different colour combinations for 2 colours, and a number for 3 colours actually, or 5 for 3 colours. We chose a 3-colour one and ended up using a pre-con, an actual theme deck pre-con, which was headed up by Sakar Deathkeeper, and that was, I believe, from Cold Snap. I think was the theme deck came from Cold Snap. So we had a starter kit in the Jund colours, which contained quite a lot of cards in it already, and then we just added in extra cards. So you could do a similar thing here if you had a number of those starter kits that you'd constructed, or your own ones lying around. You start off with quite a strong foundational base, and then you just use the cards you pulled to fill out the rest of the deck. Now it's a bit of a cheat, but with a really weak card pool, that may be your only choice. So those are those sort of 4 approaches we could take. Like I said, in this video it's really just concentrating on 2. Now the other thing you've got to do here when you're doing this is sort of go through and try and separate what actually is playable in the deck. You could just fill it with random cards with the wrong colour, but you wouldn't get a very good deck. And to be honest with you, anyway, I don't think that the cards I ended up were particularly good anyway, but they sort of work, and you'll see as I go through them. I'm not going to go into super depth on this, but I just thought people would be curious, like, if you had this 30 packs you'd opened and you did this, what would it sort of look like? So when you go through the cards, the way I did it is I approached it from looking at the cards are roughly going to fall into 3 categories. First category, if I'm super lucky, these cards are just good in commander, period. Okay, they're going to be playable across multiple decks. If I got super lucky, there might be some staples in here, but that could be a bit of a high wish. So that's that first category. Second category, the cards certainly would be playable in certain types of commander deck, or under certain synergies, or under certain tribal considerations, or certain strategies, but not playable across the format as a whole. And some of them might even be quite corner casey and only appear in certain fringe commander decks with a sort of a commander that's not played an awful lot. My suspicions are, well, actually no, most of the cards that I'm pulling here, which would be sort of fall into that category of being, yes, they're playable in a certain deck. And you're going to see this. We got a few things like stuff that appears in goblin decks, which is, yes, it's playable in certain red decks, but it's probably not the best cards in the world for a multiplayer format. And then certainly the third category is they're just completely not playable in EDH, so they just don't make any sense at all in any deck that you might imagine. I mean, you could argue that they might crop up in some fringe tribal deck, but I've tried to exclude those cards from the pool when I was sorting. So what we've ended up here, we've got 3 piles in front of us. This pile here, and I'm going to go through all of these. These are all the rares that got pulled. In the middle is a pile that we're going to be using for one of the decks, just to explain, and then the other pile is relevant to the second deck. Both decks use a common colour. So firstly, let's just talk about the rares. Again, I'm not going to read out everything that's on here, but I just wanted to pull out certain things. So we've got Emiria Shepherd. It's probably the best EDH card in the pool. This one I will read out. 5 and 2 whites. Creature angel with flying landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may return target non-land permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. If that land was a plains, you may return that non-land permanent card to the battlefield instead. Great in a mono white EDH commander deck. Unfortunately, we can't really use it in here. Well, actually, that's not true. In the second deck, it would go in there, but it's not as good as if it had been a monocolor. We don't have any white monocolor commanders in our pool, and I don't know even if we'd have enough white cards to support that if that was the case. Then we've got cards like Righteous Authority. That's white blue. We don't have a white blue commander. Treasury Thrall, another card that tends to crop up in commander in extort decks and white blue decks. Certainly, I think it's even in one of the white blue starter, whatever it's called, starter kit that I was mentioning earlier from the Benny Smith article. I think that's in there. Firemind's Foresights, white blue card, good in decks with commander decks where they sort of care about instants, and basically it's a tutor card for 3 mana instants, 2 mana instants, and 1 mana instants. And we move on. We've got Dragonskull General, so it would have been good in a white deck. So I'm just off camera. I'm going to just separate these out. Goblin Diplomats, interesting in commander, diplomatic political card that you can utilise. We've got 1,000 Winds. So as we go through this, we're moving through cards that become less and less playable in EDH. Some of these commands work in EDH because they play on the political element, so things like Harmless Offering. Of course, there's 2 scenarios you use this. One is you want to give another player something useful to help them out in the hope that they're going to help you out later in the game. Also, it might be you want to give them something not so useful. And green, we've got Scar Goliath. So we've hit our first commander here, which is Jory in Ruin Diver. I will read this one out because it's the legendary in here. So white, blue, red, legendary creature, Merfolk Wizard. It's a 2/3. Whenever you cast your second spell, each turn draw a card. So this is the first deck I tried to build around. We've got a Jinxed Idol. Maybe something we can see here. We can at the beginning of your upkeep, Jinxed Idol deals 2 damage to you. Sacrifice a creature. Target opponent gains control of Jinxed Idol. We could also give it away with the Harmless Offering if we chose to do that. Emrakul's Evangel. I've used this in before. This actually I think ended up in a build of the Sekia Deathkeeper deck. So I have seen this at home in sacrifice-based EDH commander decks, which have obviously green in them. Dragonstyle Twins, we're in red for that. Soul Blade Djinn, it's a 3 and 2 blue with flying, 4/3. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So obviously good in a non-creature spell heavy deck. And you can sort of see where a spells matter deck, these sort of cards might work. So that was definitely going in my sort of to-do pile. Kythian's Irregulars. We've got a Necrotic Plague, which we pulled on the Christmas day, I think. And then we have Plagiarize. So 3 in a blue until end of turn. If target player would draw a card, instead that player skips that drawer and you draw a card. So the timing on this card, if you're going to play, is super important here. Got to play it during the early steps of a player's turn to benefit from the fact that they are drawing a card. Obviously, if they're playing a deck which is constantly drawing cards, as long as you play it before they do that, it's timing's good. But ideally, you want to play it just before their draw step. It's an instant, so you can do that. And that would be during upkeep. So you've got, untap step, upkeep, and then the draw step. And during upkeep, it's obviously when you pass priority, you can cast this instance. So timing's really important on that. And then we've got things like Pristine Skywise. Again, we haven't come across a white-blue commander yet. You can see we had quite a few some interesting white-blue cards in here. We've got a couple of those, although we could only play one. And we got onto the mono green commander. There's actually not enough green cards in here to play this, I don't think. I did a quick count up at some point, and that was the case. My Moti Jin, we're going to Evangelize, a Blessed Reversal. So now as we're going through this stack, we're getting to cards that are less and less home in EDH, or let alone any deck. Now, this is fairly low down the stack at the moment. It's not a super popular commander from what I gather, looking at the stats on EDH Rec. Now, that being said, obviously it would be a really interesting EDH commander to try in Ally Tribal. And this is the sort of commander I was talking here, where maybe your only choice is that it's on colour. Certainly we didn't pull enough allies in our pool to make this synergize with this here, but it does have haste on it. It's a 3/4 for two red and a white, so it comes out turn 4. You could buff this up, and it's not one of the best cards to turn into a Voltron commander, but the good thing is that you can basically attack with it the turn you play it, so it has haste. So you could certainly set up quite well with your hand and when you're going to play it. So that's a possibility as a commander. And then we've got things like Raksha Vizier and Kavu Mauler, Walking Sponge. Target creature loses flying, first strike and trample until end of turn, so pretty specific. Nephelia Moondrakes, and then this thing, which is Vibrating Sphere. I'm not even sure how the hell you would play this and make it work. So during your turn, all creatures you control get +2/+0. Great. During all other turns, all creatures you control get -0/-2. Not good in the sort of creatures I had access to, because it would probably kill most of them, seeing as a lot of them were low casting cost. And then we've got Inexorable Blob, possibly at home in a deck where you're filling your graveyard full of stuff, but there are stronger cards in Magic to do this. What it basically does is, whenever it attacks, if there's 4 or more cards in your card types among cards in your graveyard, put a 3/3 green ooze creature token into the battlefield. The problem is that there'd be too many things you'd have to do to make this work, and that's the problem. You don't want to be sort of stacking up criteria in order to make a card work when you could just play another card. Okay, so I'm just going to collect together. So my first thing when I was looking at this deck, or looking to put together a deck, was really to just play as many rares as possible. Obviously they had to be playable rares, but I sort of started off from that because I figured, well, possibly the rares might be more playable. So what happened was, let me just put that to one side. This is the route I started to go down. So we've got Jury and Ruin Diver, So 1 blue, red, 2, 3. So it comes out fairly far, well, reasonably quickly. It's turn 3 for 2, 3. With this interesting ability, whenever you cast your second spell each turn, draw a card. So in terms of the other rares we had, we've got this Fire Mind's Foresight, which is interesting. It's a slightly later gameplay, so we've got 7-drop, but it does go out and find relatively low mana cost cards. And so you can imagine with this on the battlefield, and then you play this, you've got at some point you play this. Next turn, you can then play. You can have enough mana to play these cards, which is then going to trigger card draw on this. So the point is, if you're using this commander, what you're looking for is low casting cost cards. Now the problem with that is, with the sort of cards we've got, a lot of times you can have low casting cost cards which have high utility in them and are still work in a multiplayer format. Obviously a lot of the time it's the higher costing cards that are the splashier ones that have the bigger effect, that have the higher power casting cost, but that doesn't stop you from building a high utility deck, which allows you to get out of a lot of situations. What this end deck probably ends up doing is you get a lot of card draw, but you're not really drawing into anything, and that's the problem with a card pool drawn from repacks, is you don't find a ton of those big splashy cards necessarily. So I think there's a lot of cards that I came across in blue and red in here which actually have card draw on them to some way, but are we going to end up drawing into nothing? That's the big problem here. So the other rares here on colour, just going back through them. So we've got Dragon Style Twins with double strike prowess, 3/3 for 3 and 2 red. I mean, we could buff that up and make it unblockable. There's various cards we've got in this deck which will do that. Again, the problem we've got here is that for a lot of these cards to work in the deck, they require a combination of cards. They don't just work on their own. It would be nice to have like a red card that has double strike and say menace on it, or double strike and some form of evasion, so that can get through, and then you could sort of add auras and equipment to it. But this deck, you've got to have other cards to set up that evasion. We've got the Harmless Offering, we've got the Goblin Diplomats, Nephilia Moondrakes. It's 5 and 2 blue for 5/5 with flying. When Nephilia Moondrakes enters the battlefield, target creature gains flying until end of turn. So we can use that on other cards, obviously other creatures, to give them evasion. Again, the problem here is we've got to go down the combination of cards routes. And now we're basically getting to the area of just cards which are on the larger side, and I'm purely playing them because I don't have a lot of heavy hitters. So Mahamoti Jin, we've got the Plagiarize, which is obviously from a spell point of view, gives us card draw. We've got the Soul Blade Jin, 4/3, 3 and 2 blue with flying. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. That works in this deck. There's not a lot of creatures in here, mainly because I didn't have a lot of playable creatures that would be relevant. We've got 1,000 Winds, which is a 5/6 creature elemental, 4 and 2 blue with flying and morph. When it turns face up, return all other tapped creatures to their owner's hands. And then we have our Jinxed Idol. Okay, so we're not really starting off from a super strong position, but we sort of have a strategy formulating here, where what we're doing is we've got trying to get lots of cards. Oh, did I mention the Walking Sponge? I don't know if I did. So this is just a defensive card. It's probably, wouldn't make the cut normally, but we're getting pretty desperate. So 1 and a blue, tap, target creature loses flying, first strike, or trample until end of turn. So it's a good way of dealing with evasive creatures, I suppose. But we're going to include that in our first sort of in our rare pile. So that's what we have so far. Now we move on to the bulk of the deck. So these were all the commons and uncommons that in some cases are playable, in some cases they're fringe playable. I'm going to go through in curve order just so you can see that there's an awful lot of low curve cards here. The other thing to notice, there's not a lot of finishers. Again, you know, just to reiterate, so we're really clear on this, I think the way this deck ends up going is that you end up with various creatures that are going to clog up the board, give you certain utility, maybe a bit of what would you call, like defensive stuff, like almost like a draw go situation where you're waiting to see what your opponents do. I see this deck being very you've got to be very sort of strategic minded with this deck and just have to play the cards at certain points. So we've got some equipment, Bone Saw, we've got Ghoul Caller's Bell, Clutch of Currents, Index. So you'll see recurring theme here where we're looking at the top of the library, or we're doing card draw, or we're scrying, that sort of stuff going on. We've got a Windcrafter with Soul Bond, so it'll Soul Bond and then give another creature flying, so we've got Evasion. Otherworldly Outburst, the Pump Spell. You can see a lot of the pump spells here are just very lackluster, but again, we just had to go with what we had. Blight Sickle, it's got Wither on it. We got a Kite Sail, which you can see how desperate I was getting. Cranial Archive, Coral Helm Guide. So you'll see there's one or two creatures that's set up for evasion. Spell Rupture, Remove Soul, so we've got a number of counter spells. Nullify, Disdainful Stroke, and then we've got a Falkenrath Exterminator. Stun, got Card Draw, Stormblood Berserker. There's a few countering things. We've got good old Raging Goblin, comes in with haste, 1/1 for 1. Not really super relevant in this deck, but again, I was really struggling for playables. Sure Strike, Mardu Scout, Curse of the Pierced Heart, Goblin Tunneler, Magmatic Chasm, Tormenting Voice. We've got Dragon Fodder, puts a couple of chump blockers in play. So you're going to see that with a lot of this, we're basically trying to just stall things until we draw into some sort of evasive combo or evasive creature. Phyrexian Vault. Also, they basically provide fodder for the sack on the Phyrexian Vault. Serrated Biskellion, Guardians of Meletis, Implement of Examination. We've got a Looter in here, Stealer of Secrets, Geist of the Archives, Belligerent Sliver, Trumpet Blast, and there's a Minotaur Sure Shot. The other thing you're going to see here is there's several creatures where they've got a power value which can be increased by investing in putting extra mana into it. So again, we're just trying to make the best out of bad cards and find some way to buff them up when we have an excess amount of mana. We've got a Rummaging Goblin, we have a Griptide, can bounce stuff to the top of an owner's library, Geist Snatch, another counter spell, Tricks of the Trade, Last Thought, which has card draw and cipher on it, Last Thought, 4C, we've got Scrying, Goblin Racketeer, got a Smouldering Werewolf. There's a few transform cards in here which transform into something a bit heavy duty. Soul Caesar, we can steal someone's stuff. Joie Isle Refuge, Mnemonic Wall, Torrent of Fire, Stone Shock Giant, Vilden Pack Outcast, a Deathless Behemoth, Mindscour Dragon, Scour from Existence, a Gearseeker Serpent, and then a Breaker of Armies and a couple of lands to help fix for well, we've got a Dread Statuary, which is just for colourless mana, but also for 4 it becomes a 4/2 golem artifact creature until end of turn. It's still a land, and we've got an Evolving Wilds. So that's our only piece of mana fixing that we have in this deck. So, I mean, yes, you can play the deck. It does have a strategy which consists of basically drawing your deck through your deck until you find something which may do an amount of damage. You could aura up and equip up the jewelry to basically do commander damage. In the hope that you're going to exceed 21 against a particular person. But you can tell I'm not particularly I wouldn't be particularly happy about playing this deck, but it's a start, and that's really the idea, to show you the other way you could have gone with this. So in combination with the red cards in there, we could use Mundai Ambush Leader purely as a red-white commander and play red-white. That would give us access to the Emeria Shepherd, although we don't necessarily benefit with the second ability if we hit any of our mountains when we're drawing. And then we've got a number of, and I don't think I'd want to play all of these, but we've got a number of rares there which would be on colour. And then we've got a whole pile of white cards here which would work with the red cards in the other deck. So we could make our red-white Mundai Ambush Leader, which has haste. We've got things like Pacifism, Revoke Existence, Palace Jailer. This is not in any particular order, I don't think. Sage's Revelry, Angelic Wall, Conviction, Sacred Cat, Hopeful Eidolon, Glint Sleeve Artisan, Scholar of Arthurios. A lot more creatures in here. We've got a Soul Mender, Oppressive Rays, Hope Against Hope. You'll see a number of enchantments here. So we've got this one. So we could put a Hope Against Hope on our Mundai, and if we have like several creatures in play, we're going to buff it up, and maybe we're just going to finish opponents off with commander damage. Got Unruly Mob, Encircling Fissure, Chroma's Blessing, Repeal the Abominable, Palace Sentinels, Palace Guards. You can see as I'm going down this pile is still organised by the sort of playability order. So things get, fringe useful, I suppose. This doesn't really help with attacking. It's more of a defending. It gives creatures 0/0/+1. And then we're getting really desperate. We've got things like life gain to try and keep us alive. Whenever a creature attacks this turn, it gains lifelink until end of turn. So yeah, you'll notice there's a lot of cards which basically just try and stop us from dying, so we can actually do something, do something. So I hope this has been entertaining. It's a useful exercise, because sometimes I find it actually, joking aside, quite handy if you really push yourself and try and work with a a sort of fringe playable card pool and just see what you can come up with. And it's amazing when you do that, you start to see certain things. And what I found useful with the process of doing this is you start off and you go, okay, this is missing and this is missing, and I'm really stretching, you know, in the case of Jorion Ruin Diver, okay, I'm trying to maximize my card draw to just draw into something that might be useful. Well, then you start to say, well, okay, what if I could actually draw into something really good? And so then you start to sort of go hunting for cards which aren't in your card pool but would be really cool in that sort of deck. Same with Mundai Ambush Leader. You know, it forces you to start thinking, okay, how can I buff this commander up? It's not really helping with anything, so maybe if I just make it you know, a finisher in its own right. And then you start to say, okay, what am I missing in the deck? What would make this a better commander? What would make the synergy better, which in the case of Mindate is pretty obvious. But by sort of stretching yourself, you then start to think through, you know, when you're working with that limitation, you go, okay, supposing I now take that limitation away and start to introduce decks, make it stronger. What's nice, I think, is that you're starting off from a deck which you've actually really thought about, because you've actually thought, how can I maximize the cards I've got to work with? I suppose that's what I'm getting at in this rather rambly ending. So yeah, you're looking at, okay, this is what I've got to work with. This is the best I can make from it. Now, if I now take out all the rubbish and put in the good stuff, I'm starting off where I've actually done some degree of optimizing, where I'm already starting to think, okay, what's the best I can do with this set of cards? And then now you're adding or replacing the bad stuff with the good stuff, and so you've got quite a, you know, in some ways quite a strong foundation to build on. So anyway, hopefully that was useful. It wasn't intended to be super in depth, but I did promise that I would do a finish off video with this to just give people ideas who maybe, you know, found themselves in a similar scenario where they've got a whole load of these repacks that they've opened for another reason, and then just, you know, thought, what the hell can I do with it? Well, here's one possible thing that you could do with it. So thanks for watching. Once again, have a fantastic new year. This is quite a bit after the new year now, but anyway, just in case you missed the other new year video, and bye for now.